I'm going to go on the record and say that the 1989 All-Star Game had two of the oddest fan voting selections of all time, one of which led to a very minor and silly controversy between a player and his manager. No matter who you think was snubbed for this year's All-Star Game, or who you believe should not be in, I guarantee it pales in comparison to what occurred in 1989. Very brief bit of context about the game itself first. You probably remember it best for Bo Jackson's leadoff home run in the bottom of the first inning, which occurred when former President Ronald Reagan was in the broadcaster booth with Vin Scully. The American League won that game 5-3, thanks in part to Jackson, who ended up winning the All-Star Game MVP. Now that we got that out of the way, who exactly were the two noteworthy fan selections? It was one player from each league. Philadelphia Phillies third baseman Mike Schmidt from the National League, and Oakland Athletics right fielder Jose Canseco from the American League. Initially, you might be confused, as those two were among the greatest players of their generations. First off, Mike Schmidt is the greatest third baseman of all time, period. It would take an hour to highlight his incredible career, but to name a few accolades, he has 3 MVPs, 10 Gold Gloves, nearly 550 home runs, and over 100 WAR. Hopefully, that's all you need to know. 1989, however, was the worst season of his career. In 42 games and 172 plate appearances, he slashed .203 with a .297 on base and .372 slugging for a .668 OPS and 91 adjusted OPS. Sure, those numbers aren't great by any means, but they're not downright terrible. We've seen much worse voted in before. That is true, but there's one missing piece of information you need to know. At the time of the All-Star break, Mike Schmidt had been retired for almost 2 months. In one of the most famous baseball moments of the decade, Schmidt abruptly retired on May 29th of that year in a press conference during the middle of a Phillies West Coast road trip. The All-Star Game didn't take place until July 11th, so yes, despite being officially retired more than 6 weeks prior to the game and posting subpar numbers, Mike Schmidt was voted as the starting third baseman. I should note that the All-Star Game fan voting started on May 4th, so while Schmidt was active for 3 weeks after the ballot's release, the point stands. This is, from what I could find, the only instance a retired player was voted for the All-Star Game, and just to add to the drama, it was a really close ballot. When voting ended, Schmidt beat out Cincinnati Reds third baseman Chris Sabo by just 16,000 votes. Both players received over 700,000 apiece, so that's roughly a 2% difference. Reds fans were probably not happy over this, as Schmidt actually had a large 87,000 vote lead heading into the final week of voting, but Sabo couldn't overtake him. Said Schmidt on this whole incident, "I'll tip my hat to the crowd and get goosebumps one more time. I think that's something I'll always remember and always be proud of. I think the fans were more or less voting for their favorite third baseman. I don't think they were saying I'm the best third baseman, just the guy who is their favorite. Heck, I might not have been voted in if I was still playing." I'm sure many people might be thinking, is this really that big of an issue? It seems kind of like a precursor to the modern legacy picks in recent times. Here's the thing, Mike Schmidt was ineligible to even play in the game. Since he was off the Phillies roster, he couldn't make an appearance at all, even if he wanted to. He did suit up in uniform and took part in pre-game activities, but that's the limit to what he did. Fun fact though, since he was technically voted as a starter, this counts towards Schmidt's All-Star Game selections. If you look at Baseball Reference, there's a star next to 1989. Also, to add insult to injury to Reds fans, since Chris Sabo went on the disabled list right before the votes ended, he never even got to be added to the roster, and this game never counted towards his overall All-Star Game selections. For those wondering, Howard Johnson of the New York Mets was the National League starting third baseman. So the moral of the story is, don't vote for retired players. Interestingly though, Mike Schmidt's selection isn't even the most unusual one from that very year. Sure, he was retired, but at least he played, and perhaps there could have been even a small chance he came out of retirement for that one game. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, Jose Canseco was voted as the starting right fielder for the American League. Canseco was coming off one of the greatest hitting seasons of all time in 1988, where he became the first player ever to hit 40 home runs and steal 40 bases in a single season. He was one of baseball's most popular players on one of the best teams, so what was the issue? Jose Canseco didn't even play in a single game up until that point. He suffered a wrist injury in the offseason that kept him out for the first half of the year. To emphasize again, he played in exactly 0 games when voting ended, yet was picked by the fans as a selection, and it wasn't even close. Canseco received over 930,000 votes, which was the third most among outfielders, and over 100,000 more than the fourth most in Mike Greenwell. I didn't even know it was possible to vote for a player on the disabled list, but here we are. Said Canseco, "The fans are, and have been, extremely supportive of me. They are the ones who vote for who they want to see in the game, their favorites, and obviously, I'm one of their favorites." Now, if that was all there was to this, it would be a non-story. Like the man himself said, he was a popular player among fans, so of course they'll vote for him no matter what. Couldn't the American League just replace him with someone that isn't injured, as they do every single year? Well, yes, but it wasn't that simple. You see, in the weeks, let alone days, leading up to the All-Star Game, Canseco was playing in the minor leagues on a rehab assignment. The man himself said that he planned on making his season debut in the final game before the All-Star break, saying he'll play at least once beforehand. Why does that matter though? If Canseco was activated from the disabled list prior to the All-Star Game, he would then be technically eligible to play in it. Yes, there was a decent chance that a player was going to start in the All-Star Game despite only playing in a single game. As you can imagine, the Oakland Athletics manager, Tony La Russa, was not thrilled with that idea, and it just so happens that La Russa was the manager for the American League in the game. La Russa said on this, "What I'm concerned about is if he has his head on straight about what he's supposed to be doing, and that's to help us win the division. If he doesn't understand that, then the All-Star Game is just one little problem. I think he understands that." Oakland General Manager Sandy Alderson also said, "It's our decision when he comes off the disabled list, and he has to be activated to play in the All-Star Game. It's a decision that can be made all the way up until Sunday. Even if we activate him, if we feel it's not in the best interest of the Oakland A's to play him in the All-Star Game, we might prefer that he takes 3 or 4 days off." In turn, Canseco was not happy about the A's decision, as he said, "I don't think it's in Tony's jurisdiction to decide whether or not I play in the All-Star Game. With all due respect to Jose Canseco, it is in fact 100% Tony La Russa's jurisdiction in whether you play or not." Of course he and the A's are going to say no. They don't want to risk any further injury. La Russa was, how should I say, perplexed by Canseco's jurisdiction comment, seeing how La Russa has a law degree. He probably knew more about jurisdictions than anyone in baseball. Anyway, lucky for both sides, nothing ever came from this. La Russa said Canseco was fine with everything, and whether or not that was entirely accurate, that was the end of that. Canseco didn't play in the All-Star Game, but just like Mike Schmidt, this selection also counts towards his career total. For anyone curious, Canseco ended up not making his season debut until after the break anyway. Here's another fun fact. Since he was still on the disabled list during the break, Canseco was replaced as the starting right fielder by Ruben Sierra of the Texas Rangers. At the time the All-Star voting concluded, Sierra was leading the American League in batting average and RBIs, as well as several other top placements. It's honestly incredible how arguably the best hitting outfielder at the time only started thanks to a technicality, but that's neither here nor there. Over 35 years ago, we saw two of the strangest All-Star Game selections of all time. One of a player who was retired, and one of a player who hadn't played all season.